Hey everybody, good morning. How y'all doing today? So I wanted to give you guys kind of an update on what's going on or what has happened because this is the past with Naomi Jones. Her mother filed a civil lawsuit against the company, the management company that was managing the apartment complex where she lived, where her daughter at the time, 12-year-old Naomi Jones, was abducted and then later unalived. She filed a lawsuit and it was a settlement. So I wanted to just complete um, everything that I know about the Naomi Jones case so that we all know all the information and it's available in that collection about what happened to Naomi Jones. So let's just quickly do that today, okay? So on my Facebook Hidden Horror page, I've added in all of these links that I'm going to discuss. One is a newspaper article, and the other is from the case. Her attorneys posted on their page what happened in the civil lawsuit. So I have that. And then I want to talk a little bit about Megan's Law. So I'll do that at the end. Okay, so let's go, everybody. I'm going to start with Naomi's mom, the civil lawsuit from her attorney's page. Um, Her attorney was the Haggard Law Firm, and of course, they have a website. If you click the link, it'll take you right to their page. If you're interested in reading that, or you're looking for an attorney in the state of Florida, okay? So you can check that out. So this was a civil lawsuit. So this was posted on March 31st of 2020, and the title of it is Settlement in Naomi Jones, Negligent Security Wrongful Death Case. And this was out of Pensacola, Florida. Michael Haggard and Christopher Marlowe, so those were her attorneys, have settled the negligent security wrongful death lawsuits involving the abduction and murder or unaliving of 12-year-old Naomi Jones. Claims against the principal defendant, the management company of the Pensacola apartment complex where she was abducted, were resolved under confidential terms. So they're not going to give the information because they sealed it, so it's confidential. But they're saying that they did reach a settlement in the case, but they're not going to give the details. But let's continue on. That part is not so much important. We want to focus on the aspect of what was the lawsuit based on. It's a civil lawsuit, right? So we already know that her predator, he was convicted. He did go to court. He went to trial. It took about 2 to 3 years, but he was convicted. But this is on the civil side. So that was the criminal side. Now the civil side has reached a point where her mother decided to file a civil lawsuit against the management company that was managing the property, the apartment complex. So they reached a settlement, but they're not going to disclose the details. But let's continue on. We want to know about the reasoning why. Okay, the lawsuit against the owner of the apartment complex was resolved for policy limits of $2 million. Shantara Hurry, Jones's mother, hopes the impact of these civil cases will send a message to other apartment complex owners and managers to improve their standards of monitoring who is living or visiting a property. She says, nothing will ever make my family whole again, but I hope that the result of this legal action will stop another family from suffering the horrible tragedy my loved ones and I still live with today. So Some of this is partly, if you were to do a search for a S offender, someone that has already been to prison, convicted, and is out, but they have to report where they live. If you were to go in and do a search and do it by zip code, for example, that would show those S offenders that live in your community, in your zip code, their addresses, where they live, and possibly pictures. But in this incident, he was not a resident. He was visiting frequently his girlfriend that he had a family with. So he was not a resident. His home address was somewhere else. So how do you protect kids, or how do you protect the community, even adults, when that S offender lives somewhere else but frequents and does overnight in a different area? How do you protect them? Because if you're doing a search by zip code, and if their home address, the address on their license is in a different zip code, how do you capture those people? Because they're kind of under the radar, right? If they're somewhere staying overnights here, but their addresses are tied to somewhere else, how do you capture that? It's almost kind of a loophole in a sense. And I know nothing is going to be perfect, but the reality is you're missing some of those S offenders because they could purposely use some address where they don't reside, or where they're not that often, but they live in overnight somewhere else. And this is kind of what happened, where he was visiting his girlfriend, doing overnights with his girlfriend, but his home address was somewhere else. So he would not have been picked up on the S offender registry, possibly if those were in different zip codes. Or you can usually search by name. So if you know a person's name, for example, say you're dating someone and you want to know if they have a past criminal record, for example. I have a whole separate video about Michael Kelly and how you can put in a person's name on the S offender registry. Or if you're just doing a background where you want to know if they have a criminal record, most states have a database where you can do a search by name. Okay, so you can search by name that way. And if he had, for example, any other past deeds, criminal deeds, they would be back. They would be on there. That criminal record would be on there. And in his case, he did have 2 prior S assaults when he was younger. So he would have had possibly a criminal record, depending on how long that state keeps records. So some states may keep the database record for active offenders, and then offenders that have come out of the system. So they may have been parole, or they're just completed their time. Maybe they'll only keep their records 5 years, 10 years, because that's a lot to hold in a database. But you can do some due diligence and do a search. And these are like public records, right? So they're not going to charge you. They're free. And almost every state has them. So you can do that on your own. But in this instance, and what happened to Naomi Jones, she was living in an apartment complex. And the assailant that actually abducted her lived very close. Well, he didn't live there technically, but he was always there. He was doing overnights. He was pretty much blending into the community because he was there, because he dated and had a child with someone that also lived there. So they were in close proximity. But as far as reporting as an S offender, right, he may have been using a different address. So if you're putting in and you live next door and you want to just know what S offenders are in your zip code, he may not appear because he's using a different address with a different zip code. But you still can do a criminal background search to see if a person has a criminal past. And if they're still in that database, I would say probably less than 10 years, 5 years of active offenders, they're going to be in a database. So people that are out of the system, that are parole or just completed their time, they may not be, depending on how long that state keeps records. But it's still something you can check for, okay? Just for your protection, your kids, just being safe, and being mindful of who lives around you, who's in your community, who lives next door. Or if you're deciding to go to the park, you may want to know who are ex-offenders in your zip code, just to be safe, to be aware, okay? Because that was something that was happening, I would say allegedly, in the Michael Kelly case. Michael Kelly allegedly was appearing at different places where children would be. And people were reporting to the police that his presence was there. And by him being on the S offender list, that caused the police to go and to check and see and let him know you're breaking the requirements of your parole. You're not supposed to be in these areas. You're not supposed to be around children, frequent children, be in the presence of children, go to places where children are. For example, a school, a playground, Chuck E. Cheese, for example, just places that are known where children would be. Okay. So let's keep going on with this story. Naomi Jones was abducted from the Aspen Village Apartments on May 31st, 2017, by a registered S offender who was living at the complex with his girlfriend. So they're saying that he was living there because he pretty much was, but he did have a different place, a trailer, where he considered that to be his home, not living with a girlfriend. But let's continue on because they're trying to give you some background. Naomi's body was found 5 days later in a nearby creek. The killer confessed to the unaliving and is pending trial on capital murder charges. Well, he's already been convicted. He went to trial and he was convicted. Christopher Marlowe of the Haggard Law Firm says the defendant failed to monitor their property for people living there off lease. So he was not a part of the lease, but he was living there. And they're saying that they're negligent. The company that was managing the apartment, they were negligent because they were not monitoring people that were living in those apartments, but they were not on the lease. Marlowe says, had common apartment industry practices been followed at this relatively small complex, the fact of the attackers' presence upon the premises would have been known and prevented. So they're saying that because the management company did not inquire if there was someone staying at the property that they weren't on the lease, was not on the lease, that this allowed this person to stay there, and then the residents in that apartment complex, they're not aware. They were never notified that he was a S offender, and they should have been notified because they could have taken measures to protect themselves, to prevent something like the passing, the unaliving of Naomi Jones from happening through prevention if they had known. So they're saying that there's a liability or negligence by the management company because they failed to know who was staying in these properties, in the apartments that were off the lease. Because if you're on the lease, maybe this part of Florida, they do a background check to make sure that no one's coming in as a S offender. They don't want possibly an S offender living in their apartment complex because there possibly could be children. There could be a playground there. They don't want them to have access. They don't want them to have proximity to children. So a way to do that is a background check through the person that's applying to live in the apartments. But because he's off the lease, that information would have been captured. A background check would have been captured. They wouldn't have been able to deny the lease because he's not on it. Okay, let's continue on. So they're saying that this was also a common apartment industry practice too, which is true. You want to check the background of a person that you're renting from or leasing to. You want to ensure that it's going to be a good match, a good fit for the community. So in this case, it's an apartment complex. So you also have to consider others because you're living in close proximity, maybe side by side or up and down. So you're going to have a variant of different ages, maybe maybe some children in the community if it's not a senior living, right? So you do have to consider that, and you do want to do at least due diligence and do a background check before you lease to anybody, because you're allowing them to be in that community for a set amount of time, 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever the lease is. And they're saying that's a common industry practice. And because the complex was small, it wouldn't have cost you a lot of money. You wouldn't have had to go through a lot. You're not checking a lot of people because most people are signing up for a year lease. So it's not like it would have been some type of strenuous cost or difficulty to do this. They're saying that our investigation involved a comprehensive review of FBI, sheriff, police, and nonprofit agencies who worked to help find Naomi Jones, added Marlowe. Marlowe looking on as Hurry speaks to the news media when lawsuits were originally filed. Hurry's legal team says the case litigation included interviewing witnesses spanning several states, principally in Florida and Alabama, where the unaliver also maintained a residence. The case was fought predominantly on issue of notice, whether the defendant should have known that they had a violent ex-offender living in this family community. So again, they're saying that on the basis of them not having notice, if you have notice, you can do something about it. You're aware. You can take steps to prevent it. You can decide to move. You can ask to break your lease, get out the lease early, maybe move to a different complex where maybe an ex-offender wouldn't be. Because how much control do they have if this ex-offender is not on the lease, but he's coming and going because he has a child there? His family essentially lives there. So with the notice, they would have been able, Naomi Jones' family would have been able to make a decision about that. And because they live close proximity, very close to the unaliver's family. Okay. So that was the article on behalf of Naomi Jones's mother's attorney, right? So let's just listen. And that was the Haggard law firm. Excuse me. Something's looking sneeze. So I want to follow it up with just something from the news so we can have another perspective, right? This is the Pensacola News Journal. The link is on the Hidden Horror Facebook page. So if you want to read it later or follow along, you can. The article is dated March 30th, 2020, so they're very close to each other. And the title is Mom of Naomi Jones Reaches $2 million Settlement with Apartment Owner. So this is kind of a little bit different because in the attorney's release, he's saying that they filed a suit against the management company that managed the apartment complex. This is saying the apartment owner. So it's a little bit different, but let's read it anyway. Naomi Jones's mother has reached a settlement with Aspen Village Apartments management and ownership in a lawsuit alleging negligent security at the complex led to her 12-year-old daughter's, I'm just going to say death. Okay. On Monday, attorneys for Shantara Hurry announced, and that's Naomi Jones's mother, announced they had settled with complex owner Aspen Village Acquisition LLC for $2 million. Hurry also reached a settlement with management group Progressive Management of America, Inc. under confidential terms. Now, I'm not disputing anything that's written, but it's a little different from the other article. I'm not disputing it because I didn't write it. Hurry said she hopes the case causes other apartment complex owners to improve their standards of monitoring who is living or visiting a property. I'm just looking for justice all the way around for my daughter, Hurry said Monday. No amount of money could bring my daughter back. So it's not about anything more than just getting everyone to understand how important it is that our surroundings are safe for our children. Okay, let's keep moving. Naomi Jones disappeared from Aspen Village on May 31st, 2017, and she was found deceased in a creek a few miles away almost a week later. Robert Howard, a convicted Alabama S offender who was living part time at Aspen Village with his then girlfriend, was linked to the crime scene and is now awaiting trial on first degree murder charges. So he went to trial and he was found guilty. So we know that. Let's just give you that little update. He was found guilty. Something to note that his original two convictions for S assault, they were in the state of Alabama. So if you move from one state to another state, that does not release you from still reporting as a S offender. Your case just has to be transferred to the community that you move in, and then you will report there. But they still have to know your whereabouts, because guess what would happen? Every S offender would just move to another state where their record is not known. So no, that's not okay. I'm trying to show you guys. I'm like sitting right here, trying to move around so you can see the picture of Naomi Jones. But no, you can't move and not continue to report as an S offender. You still have to report, even if you move. And some people do move because they have in that community, they have a reputation. So some people do move. I'm trying to make myself smaller. A bit smaller so you can see Naomi Jones. Okay, let's keep going. Howard is also facing charges for failure to register as a S offender. So apparently he must have stopped registering when he moved from Alabama to Florida, which they should charge him, because that's the other little loophole that some S offenders will do. They will try to move to make it harder for those cases to be kept up with. And if they move out of state, they don't transfer the case so they can keep reporting, because they have a lot of restrictions and they don't like it. Um, they can only live so close to kids, where kids would be, for example, elementary school or middle school or playground, different areas. So they don't like it. So they'll try to move to kind of thwart um, reporting and where they live. So let's keep going. According to Florida Department of Law Enforcement records, Howard was convicted of 2 counts of R in Escambia County, Alabama in 1998. Jones's family sued the apartment's ownership and management, saying they had a duty to know and inform tenants that Howard was living on the premises. Because families living at the apartments weren't aware of his history, Howard had unfettered access to potential victims, the suit alleged. Christopher Mowley of the Haggard law firm represented Hurry in the case. Historically, I found that apartment communities and the management companies do as absolutely little as they can get away with, and generally not a bit more system, he said. The only deterrent that this system can offer is one for money damages. Until and unless there's different tool in our toolbox available to force the change that should have existed from day one. We're going to continue bringing cases like this until real change is effected. The defendant initially argued that Naomi's death was the result of actions by parties over whom they had no control, namely Howard and Naomi's parents, and that they were not liable in the case. So the company that was managing the apartment complex, their argument was that this was out of their control because Technically, Howard was not, he was not on the lease. He was not a resident. He did not apply for the lease. He was not on the lease. And technically, the expectation, um, how can the apartment managing company anticipate him later coming, dating a woman, or having this relationship? They're not married. He didn't live there. How can they be held responsible if they didn't even know this was going on because he was not part of the lease? And they're saying that this was beyond their control, and that the people that had the most influence and power to control the environment is Naomi's parents, that they should be taking more responsibility in having someone at the age, she was 12 years old at the time of her death, that the parents should have been involved, should have been there, should have been monitoring the children, watching the children. It shouldn't be the apartment company's responsibility to know who is a guest or who's doing an overnight if they're not on the lease. So that was their initial response, saying that they were not responsible in this case. Okay, let's keep going. The trial was originally scheduled to start last week. Hurry's initial complaint requested $15 million in damages. Hurry's not God. She can't bring her child back. But obviously, if she could, she would in a heartbeat. One second, I lost where I was at. And forego everything, Marlowe said. He added, people have a lot more power to prevent a horrible thing like this from happening than they give themselves credit for. Businesses, or in this case, apartment complexes, have a tremendous amount of power and influence over who lives under a common family roof. And if as much attention were given to taking care of your own house before bad things like this happen, fewer bad things like this would happen. Speaking on how Naomi's death impacted her family, Hurry said they've been taking things one day at a time. We're learning how to cope, she said. It's so hard. It's very difficult. We continue to pray, a lot of prayer. We think about the good times. We try to remember Naomi as the happy, bubbly, sweet, sassy little girl that she was. And actually, right now, that's all we are holding on to in order to cope with my daughter's demise. The civil trial, along with Howard's criminal trial, were both delayed when the Florida Supreme Court suspended non essential court functions to slow the spread of COVID-19. Although the civil trial has been settled, Howard will still face a jury when regular court functions resume. So, in this instance, we already know what happened. Mr. Howard was convicted at trial. So, we know that. Okay. So, I want to I want to touch on um, something else, something different. Um, I want to talk about Megan's Law. Okay. So Megan's Law, Megan's Law is the name for a federal law in the United States requiring law enforcement authorities to make information available to the public regarding registered sex offenders. Laws were created in response to the murder of Megan Conker. So on my Hidden Horror page, the link is there, and it talks about what Megan's Law is. But let's read a little bit about Megan's story first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the law and how it came about, because it's based truly on what happened to her murder, and what was realized after her murder was that there was essentially no way to know what S offenders were living in your community, and you could literally have one living next door and not know it. So Megan's Law brought about major changes to uniformly put a database together to be able to make the community aware of S offenders. Okay, but let's talk about Megan's Law for just a minute. In Megan's story, because um, unfortunately, heinous things sometimes happen, and the result of of that death is laws that will come forward to protect children because they're so vulnerable and unassuming and usually good natured. So um, some things very, very sad have to happen for the idea to come into play that we need these additional protections, okay, in the community. So I'm reading right from the link from Megan's Law. You can follow along or you can read it later. On July 29, 1994, 7-year-old Megan Kanka was armed and murdered by Jesse Timadaquas, a neighbor in Hamilton Township, New Jersey. Timadaquas was a R registered S offender when he moved across the street from Megan and her family. So he literally lived right across the street. And what happens with proximity, it gives a person access. They're going to see you on a regular basis. They may see you playing outside, going to the car, maybe walking down the street, maybe riding your bike. And when an S offender lives this close, sadly, a lot of times they just look at when is there going to be an opportunity? When will they have a moment alone where nobody's watching, or what they feel nobody's watching and they can get away with it? It may take less than 30 seconds to snatch a small child. And that's why we need these registries, so we know who's living near us, especially with smaller children. Okay, so let's continue. The Kanka family was unaware their neighbor was a threat to their safety. Timadaquas lured Megan into his house by offering to show her a puppy, and subsequently arred her and strangled her to death. Now remember, she was 7 years old. 7 years old. He moved her body to his truck, placing the body in a wooden toy chest and dumping it in nearby Mercer County Park. The next day, he confessed to investigators and led police to the site. The court sentenced Timadaquas to death, and the sentence was upheld by the New Jersey Supreme Court on appeal. Timadaquas remained on New Jersey's death row until December 2007, when the New Jersey legislature abolished the state's death penalty. The ban resulted in Timadaquas' sentence being commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the wake of the tragedy, The Kankers sought to have local communities warn about S offenders in the area. All states now have a form of Megan's Law. Private citizens have had access to records on S offenders registered with local law enforcement under California's Megan's Law since 2004. So next year will be 20 years. Previously, the information was available only by personally visiting police stations and sheriff's offices. The law was given final passage by the legislature on August 24, 2004, and signed by the governor on September 24, 2004. So we're literally just a year under, this being 20 years. California has required S offenders to register with their local law enforcement agencies since 1947. California's Megan's Law provides the public with certain information on the whereabouts of sex offenders so that members of our local communities may protect themselves and their children. The law is not intended to punish the registrant and specifically prohibits using the information to harass or commit any crime against a registrant. And I think that's important too. You know, they did their time and they're out and they're registering. And that's important. We want them to register. But we shouldn't take that information and then harass them, you know, post their picture or send a letter to every household. We don't want to do things like that and kind of harass them because they are complying. Unfortunately, this is deviant behavior, and a lot of S offenders, they are not rehabilitated. So when they come out, it's highly likely that they will offend again. The sad and the unfortunate part is some of them may feel that they don't want to go back to prison and they will unalive their victim because they don't want someone to be able to identify them or place them at the scene. So that is the unfortunate part. We usually get multiple cases, a history of offending in these type of cases. So I just want to go over what on Megan's Law they feel is the problem, just because we want to be solution oriented, right? On the page, they say, while the contents of state S offender registries are public record and you have a right to see them, access is often difficult. Often you must know the name of the individual for which you are looking, and in many states, you must go to your local police station and complete an information request form. In some states, there are fees and search limits. Many states now maintain websites, but these often have limited functionality. And this is what they're saying the solution is. Kids Live Safe is an innovative organization focused on protecting kids from S predators. Since 2009, Kids Live Safe has provided families with an extremely powerful suite of top-rated web-based child protection tools to help you and your family be aware, be alert, and be safe. Kids Live Safe is not a government entity. So just to wrap all of this up, I want you guys to know that there is some free searches. Typically, the state that you live in will have a S offender registry, and it's going to be online. It's going to be on a state website, and those searches will be free. And typically, you can either search by name or by your zip code. The zip code is nice because you see right in the area where you live where the S offenders live. Now, if you have someone that you think is an S offender, you can put their name in the system and search usually. The alternative, and what I also think you should do, is the state will also have just a criminal search if one has a criminal record. And this can include different crimes, not just uh, S crimes, right? So you can put their name in there and you can see if they have any criminal convictions. Now, there's different kind of ways to do it. Sometimes these are active offenders, so they would be in prison at the time. And then you have people that have been paroled or probation and they're still reporting. And they'll usually report those names between 5 and 10 years. Every state is different because that's a database, and that database is holding records. So they can only keep a record for so long because the database fills quite fast. Um, so that's something else to kind of consider. Use your state resources if you want to look up an S offender, or if you just want to see if someone has a criminal past. Those are typically free. You can do a search by name, and in the case of S offenders, you usually can do a search by zip code. So I hope this information can be useful to you. I just want to thank the families of people that have had the loss to think of ways to keep children safe. People like Megan's family, people like John Walsh's son, Adam, they have been at the forefront for 20, 30 years trying to create systems that are uniform, that have accessibility for the public, so that we have a way to find out who's missing and try to bring those people home, right? And unfortunately, they had to experience that loss before this technology, these ideas came forward for protecting our kids where we live, right? In the community where we live, in the areas where our kids go to school. Most people aren't thinking of these type of things until it happens to them. And then we get things like Megan's Law, where they're creating a database for S offenders. Or in the case of John Walsh's son, Adam, just the idea of where do you go when you have a missing child? You contact the police, but what if the child is taken out of state? So you create a whole system. The milk carton with the missing person's picture, getting it out, the Amber Alert, right? Notifying people through their cell phones, through the Amber Alert. These are all victims that essentially have brought us ways to save our kids and the kids behind our kids, to keep them safe. These are ways that we can take action and be proactive, preventive, not just reactive. Okay. So this was a pretty hard video. It's pretty sad. Um, just want to thank those families because um, without their loss, we may have not gained that knowledge to do these things and ways to store and collect information and get it to the public in an easy way. So you're sitting at home or on your phone and you can do searches, right? So let's just take a moment, have a moment of silence. I have a picture of Megan. Let's see if I can get it larger. I wish I had a better picture of Megan. Nope, they're not going to let me show you. I'm going to post it on the Hidden Horror page on Facebook. I'll post that, and we're still going to have a little moment of silence for children like Megan, Kanka, Adam Walsh, of course, Naomi Jones. So many kids that through their deaths, we have gained more ways to try to save our children and protect the community and provide tips and ways to get this information out a lot quicker. Let's just have a moment of silence for them, okay? And just saying thank you to them and their families. Okay, everybody. This is a hard video for me. Thank you for watching this video and checking it out. I hope that you use some of those resources. Share those resources, okay? Thanks for checking out this video, my friends. Stay safe, stay smart, stay savvy. And hopefully I'll see you in a future video. Okay, have a good one. Bye, everybody.